Hi, host Eric here, and this is great. This thing I'm watching is great. This guy is much more attentive to the instructive specifics of talking about this stuff than I tend to be. And he doesn't have a picture of himself talking, and he's got words up on the screen and stuff. He spends more time making his videos. I'm going to make a couple of these kind of videos as well that are more attentive to production value and such. But at the moment, I just want to, first of all, give mad props to this guy. Now, this is a smart fellow right here, and watch what he does. And this is so important. This is what I keep talking about in my videos.
That it's impossible for the oppressor to be the oppressed.
And therefore men cannot possibly be oppressing women. So I wonder what doublethink she's going to use to dig herself out of this pit.
However, only oppressed people experience all of that, as well as it being institutionalized and systemic.
So she digs deeper with the tautology. The sort of social oppression we are talking about is, of course, institutionalized and systemic within society. And she'd already established men as being oppressed. So it's not like men don't have all of this apply to them as well. But
All right, let's pause right there. So here's the thing. In general, with these sort of critical theory arguments by the left, there's no substance to them because they assume, as he points out a little bit later in the video, I think, they assume that they impose upon individuals this group status and then speak on their behalf, but those individuals don't necessarily want to ascribe to that group status, and even if they do ascribe to that group name, they don't necessarily ascribe to every particular attribute that you assign to being representative of that group. So this is why when Bernie Sanders says free college and poor people in America, Bernie Sanders, you're not talking about anybody but yourself. You're saying, I have this perception of poor people that looks like this. And I believe that here's the criterion that we're going to use to say, if this number is next to your name, you qualify as being in this group. And once you qualify as being in this group, I'm going to attribute to you all sorts of realities that simply aren't true. I'm going to assume that you want my help, that you need my help, that you need the government's help. I'm going to assume that you believe this is a good idea, and he pitches it as such. But of course, the problem is it works the same way in the other direction. If you've got a bunch of individual citizens who are ascribing a lot of outcomes to a dominant elite or some other term that means the big bad corporate rich people or whatever, if you have that in play, then necessarily you're not talking about anything. So one of my LDers, my LD coach / student, she ran a feminist case this year on the topic of gun control, arguing that guns were a tool of the patriarchy, that it was necessary to place the resolution of oppression as the highest value in the round. That's what we should judge the round on, and it's because exclusion from political processes dehumanizes. It's just a bunch of critical theory stuff like that. I mean, I helped to put it together. It's nonsense, and you only know this when you are a debate coach or somebody like this guy who's super smart, Sargon of Akkad. I have no idea anything about him except he tears this woman to pieces with good cause. And he doesn't simply explain exactly why there's something wrong with those arguments, but he does something else coming up, and I'm going to push play again. It's important to do.
the thing is, I think the term oppressed people here, I think this is her presupposing that women and minorities, LGBT people, are oppressed, and therefore she's referring to them as oppressed people. And if we do change the word simply to women, which is probably what she's thinking of, let's be honest, that's not a tautology in her head anymore. That's not wrong. Only women experience all of what men experience, as well as being institutionally and systemically oppressed. So she hasn't actually made an argument. She's actually turned around and said, yeah, well, women have it worse.
Men can get raped too. I can't stand this argument. You have to be a certain level of horrible to pit victims against each other, whatever gender.
What a fucking bizarre thing to say. Nobody is pitting victims against each other, you sociopath. The reason that saying, yeah, that men can get raped too, is an argument against feminism, is because you are specifically excluding them from your activism.
Thank you. Thank you. You see, and it is true. Is there absolutely a moral component to argumentation? Of course. How could there not be? When I get offended, it is not because somebody disagrees with me ever. I get offended because they are non-responsive. If a person is going to make a bunch of claims, especially if those claims have anything to do with what I ought to be doing, and I point out substantive reasons as to why those claims should not be given weight in terms of making behavioral decisions, then the burden is upon you to account for that contradiction. Either to concede, okay, I was wrong about that, or to say, well, here's an additional factor that you didn't consider. Something like that. To simply move on to a new point, as though it doesn't matter which points I'm presenting, the important thing is that I'm right. You accrue weight within a given time frame, within the scope of a given discussion or dispute. The accruing of weight by each party is unavoidable. When you state things, that's a time object. That sits there on the flow, on the representation of what this dispute is about. And it can get referenced. So I can say, hold on, before I address this second point of yours, you initially said this, blah, 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 blah. I pointed out that that's not only is that not true, but that if it were true, the opposite of it, the opposite of what you say would happen. Okay? If it were true, then it would have the opposite impact you say. And here's why. But first of all, here's why it's not true. So I made those arguments. So let's say the arguments are, to give you a good example, we're arguing about whether dogs or cats are better. And I've issued a framework at the outset that says I'm arguing in favor of cats. And my framework is we should prioritize impacts related to the fitness of the species as an independent of humans. That's what better means genetically better. And you've not issued any framework. You've just said dogs are better because they help blind people, dogs are better because you can herd your sheep, dogs are better because they keep your home free of burglars. And I've said cats are better because they can escape predators better, they can survive in harsher climates, and they can survive falls better. I don't know, find their own food better, something like that. And then we've argued it out, and then in the finals, as we're going through it, I keep saying, the problem that my opponent has is he is not addressing the framework point I keep making, which is we should evaluate this on the basis of fitness of species. My opponent keeps saying dogs are better because they help humans more. And that's not useful at all, he says, because nobody benefits from that. You can't point to any people who benefit from that. But he has never actually made an argument that says we should evaluate this round according to helpfulness to humans. He hasn't provided any reasons why we should evaluate it according to that, whereas I've provided reasons as to why we should not. I've indicated that there's no reason provided in this resolution to assume that human beings come into it at all. It says dogs are better than cats. It does not say anything about dogs are better for humans than cats, cats are better for humans than dogs. And so in the absence of those words, it naturally makes sense to evaluate those species as independent species, not as they relate to human beings' usefulness. So that's why we should prefer fitness of the species. I've made that argument, Judge. He's not responded to that argument, and he's not addressed my actual rebuttals to his points. His points keep being about people, about usefulness to people. I keep conceding that that is useful to people, but that's not how we should evaluate this round. And he just says, my opponent conceded that it is useful to people, therefore I should win this round. He has not made that framework argument. So, as a matter of fact, Judge, because that argument, because the weight that the determining factors in the round in terms of weight are going to be, this is going to be determined on which scale you use rather than on who piled up a bigger pile for either scale, for the same scale. If we had both agreed to his framework, implied framework that he never stated, which is that usefulness to people should be preferred as a criterion for adjudicating the round, well, then I would lose because I've provided fewer benefits to people. That's why we have to make these framework arguments. So, essentially, the problem with the critical theorists in general is they refuse to engage on the framework arguments. They refuse to engage on how they are going to adjudicate the validity of what they're saying, what standard we both agree on, we can hold ourselves and our opponents accountable for. And what causes people like Sargon of Akkad, or whatever his name is, what is his name? Let me see. Sargon of Akkad. When he is tearing her apart like this, it's justified because why? She is saying, my logic is correct and your logic is wrong. Here's why your anti-feminist arguments fail. Here's why feminist arguments are actually correct and yours are incorrect, and why ethics and morals are on my side. Because it's really it's an issue of ethical decision making. If we look at what playing field are we on, it's one of ethical decision making as well as one of argumentation. Now, she is using argumentation to claim ethical high ground. In that case, she is absolutely fair game. And in fact, it is she who is being unethical for applying different rules to herself and other people. She expects other people to hear her logic and be convinced by it because it's sound. But it's not sound, and then when someone points that out, they don't like that. This is not something that's just about this woman. It's about 95% of the people in the world. They speak and use words as do I, with intent to cause an outcome. And thus they present things through a necessary logic because truth is an emergent function of grammar. They can't avoid making statements, and statements have truth values unavoidably. However, their truth value does not link to the physical world. It links to that which is necessary for conflicting realities to coexist peaceably, which means we have to default to consistency in logic. We have to default towards not merely making arguments, but making arguments about how we are arguing and about making arguments about why we are arguing. We need, as a species, to spend a lot more time understanding how we are thinking about the world. The world is not a place of causality, as we think it is, but we are subject to it nonetheless. Let's utilize those apparent forces or apparent laws of reality, utilize them to equip oneself with the benefits of competency at those tools. Benefits being additional clarity, additional insight. Capacity for growth and improvement is contingent upon the ability to recognize weaknesses and failings. When Sargon refers to this woman as a sociopath, I absolutely love that. We have to take back the framework. Nobody is advocating, if somebody is advocating for oppression of women, then I oppose that wholeheartedly. If there's somebody out there who is saying, women as a group, I hate you, I want to oppress you, and here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to catch you and lock you up. I hate that person, and he needs to be, if he does anything, if he violates a right, he needs to be imprisoned. That's the problem. That person who's saying, hey, you big group over there, I hate you, or you're the problem, big group, that's the problem. So if I say feminists are the problem, but I don't think that. I consider myself a feminist. I consider bad argumentation a problem. I consider an unwillingness to be objectively self-critical a problem. And I consider an embrace of fallacious realities as a problem. So I want to take this moment then to just say to Mr. Saargon of Akkad, thank you for fighting the good fight. I consider myself inspired. I'm going to make some more videos that actually break down some of these argumentation things from more of an instructive approach. And it's good to use examples like you did right there. It's smart. I'm a little bit lazier than that usually, but it's worth it. I have an obligation to do it. Because when I say, good job fighting the good fight, rock on, I mean, it's the good fight because every alternative to the good fight, well, it accomplishes more oppression.